Okay, what we want to start talking about now isn't something that's specific to your presentation boards, but like I said in the beginning, not everything in this class is going to be. Now that you guys have a lot of the basics down, we're going to start moving into some more advanced stuff, and it will be things that you may be able to use in Studio, but it'll definitely be things that you'll be able to use in the future. So I wanted to start talking to you about, making vignettes of things, right? So vignettes are kind of like renderings, but they're more of a composite of a bunch of different types of things on top of each other. So they can be the same thing, but they tend to, at least in my experience and I think architectural lingo, tend to be something that is a much quicker, looser, rougher version of something. So for example, sorry, let me grab this. For example, this was just we're working on a project with the Girl Scouts, and this was a really quick rendering vignette that I put together to show them what we were thinking in terms of material and massing and those sorts of things. This isn't a photorealistic rendering. It's somewhat stylized. It's not entirely accurate in terms of how the building would sit in the site. So if we were doing a rendering of this, it would likely be more time intensive in terms of getting all the geometries set up correctly. But this was something that could be put together in 30 minutes starting from having the Rhino file finished. And so it's a tool that's really good. This is another version. This is something from a project that I was working on in New York. We were working on a athletic center for a private girls' high school, and at a certain phase in the project, we needed to start showing ideas about material to the clients, but we didn't want to scare them off by doing photorealistic renderings. Clients have a tendency to, if you show them something that looks too finished too early in the process, they get a little bit scared, like you've made all the decisions for them and they don't have any say in the matter. At least this has been my experience. And so even though we had a really sophisticated 3D model, we printed out renderings and hand drew over them. So this is a hand-drawn sketch. Let me turn off scrubby zoom here. This is a hand-drawn sketch that was over top of, let me see if I have the original rendering layer here. Yeah. No, I don't have the original rendering, but you can see all the other layers, and we'll look at those in a minute. And so just talking about how you can start bringing qualities to a drawing or to a rendering or to a visualization without having to go into photorealistic rendering mode. We will do that a little bit later in the semester, but for now it would be nice to look at these things. There's also a version, we also looked at, let's see, we looked at things like this somewhat earlier on. So this is a Louis Suramaki-Lewis sketch of a project that they were working on. So again, it has kind of some qualities to it that give you a sense of the context, that give you a sense of massing and color. It shows people, so it shows you some scale. Shows people, so it starts showing you some of the ideas of function of the spaces. But it is not a finished rendering, right? The trees are shadow outlines. You start to get a sense of the trees shadowing on the ground, which is a nice effect that you can do in Photoshop. But it's not a realistic drawing. You can see they have a stylized quality where they start to take these extensions of lines and graphically reinforce the geometry of the building by extending those construction lines out, as you guys are doing in your kitchen object drawings. You're showing the construction lines. And so there's a lot of different styles of doing this. But I thought we would go through really quickly and I'll just talk you through kind of how this was set up. Select a layer here. So talk you through how this was set up and give you a sense of that you guys can do this at this point with the level of drawings that you have in Rhino, right? So this started out just as a really horrible Rhino rendering. Right, so this in Rhino was just we talked briefly about putting textures on things, right? So in the materials beside your layer color, you can add a bump in terms of a bump map in terms of the color. So there's a series of just show you what the files look like. So we had found this material that is the Corten color. I had just a grass material, and then we had a wood material. And so those are the only things that are rendered in this Rhino file. So there's wood placed on here, there's the Corten placed on here, and the grass placed on the ground plane, just to give a little bit of a sense of color, material, and texture. And we will go in more in detail in how to do this in other programs later in the semester. But for now, you can get a pretty accurate representation of this in here. And so this was rendered with the surface edges and ISO curves on, making sure all the ISO curves were turned off, so you get a little bit of a more graphic quality of rendering, so you can see the black lines that are reinforcing the lines of the geometries. And then this was saved, and I had a photograph of the site that looked like this. And so I went in and just pulled out some trees and left the background. So, let's see. So, sorry, let me get to the right rendering here. So these trees I just grabbed using the lasso tool. So this cluster over here, just taking the polygonal lasso or the other lasso tool and kind of selecting roughly, loosely along the edges. And you'll do it more carefully than this, but you'll see that there were a couple different filters, like some blurring filters that were put on that helped kind of soften it up a little bit. So there's a lot to this, obviously, that makes it look like it fits in the context. There's all of this kind of scrub brush that's happening in the background, and all of these smaller limbs. But you can grab just this main element. And so if I take all of these things, I'm going to make this into a layer just by double-clicking on the background, so I have it as a layer. And then under Layer, I'm going to make a new one via Cut. So now I have the trees on a layer, and I have the background on a layer, right? So I could put something in between them and make it look like it's behind the trees in front of the background, right? So if I added a new layer in between, I could make, I could just make just a box for now so you can see, and fill it with 50% gray, right? And so it's in front of the background behind the trees. Does that make sense? So we just pulled the trees to the front. And then I just did the same thing to this tree over here. And so looking at, sorry, I keep pulling up the wrong rendering. So looking at this, so those trees were scaled up a little bit and moved off to the side in terms of the composition. The same thing with this one over here. But you can start to see, like if I turn off all of these layers, the background, I made it a little bit less transparent or a little bit less saturated. And so we just did that under hue and saturation. You can start to desaturate things, so it makes it more black and white. This one wasn't entirely black and white, but we bumped the color way down. And then there were under filter, you can start to go in and see what effect different filters will have on something. And you have to use filters sparingly and intentionally. You can make something look like a cartoon version of itself very quickly using filters, but they can also be very good, especially in more gestural types of drawings, to help you get a point across, right? So if you start to blur the background a bit, which is what I did here, just with an angled strokes or dark strokes or some of these different filters, it starts to blur the background, so you get a sense that there are trees back there, but you're not looking so closely at the edges and trying to understand exactly what tree it is and what location on the site. Did the same thing with the ground. So this foreground was from that original Rhino drawing, but it was just the hue and saturation was really adjusted, the lightness was adjusted, so the saturation was taken way up, the hue was shifted to be more of like a yellowy green. And then we cut it out around the cabin itself. So here was the cabin that was brought in. If you remember the original rendering, the colors were really yellow. So this is all really yellow. So I brought it in and adjusted the colors on it. So image, adjustments, hue and saturation. So if it starts out life way too yellow or way too red, you can start making those adjustments in here so it looks more correct. And then just bringing in people and trees gives it a little bit more, makes it look a little bit more like it's in that place. And then this was just a clipping mask that was made to select out the portion of the grass that we didn't want. So do you understand, we'll go through kind of step by step how to do some of these different things, building up a new file, but do you understand generally how that's structured? Yeah? So I'll take you through really quickly with this one as well, just because it's more complex. One of the things I'd want to point out is that other than layer 8, which I don't know what that is, it's just some lines, everything is labeled for the most part. There's a couple random layers in here, but it's important to, especially when you start building up files, when you have a lot of different elements and you don't necessarily want them to be on the same layer, to label them, or to start using layer groups, which are this folder here. So you could put all of the people in a folder just by selecting the layers and grabbing them and dragging them into that group. So then I can turn off multiple layers at the same time without having them be collapsed down onto one layer. That's another good way to do that. I don't have... Down here at the bottom, there's a little icon that looks like a folder, and you click on that. I think you can also, on the top right, do new group, and that'll make a folder for you. And then it's just like any folder structure, file structure, you can expand, and the controlling the visibility of the main group will control everything in it, or you can still go in and individually turn single things on and off. But in here there was there's the background, which is the, just turn all these off. There's the background, which is just the hand sketch that was done on trace over top of the rendering. So you can see here it's all just hand done in pencil. We didn't live trace it. We kept the kind of quality of the pencil. And then you can start going in and adding elements. The water was really important to a pool. This is actually something that we did render out of the 3D model because we could get good water from that and good lane lines. You could put in just some color fill for starting to bring color to areas and starting to make slightly darker tones to make something look like it's receding back. So this side panel of the tile is a slightly darker gray so that it looks like it has some depth to it. Bringing people in is really important. So you bring in people, and then little things like making, let's see if we can see, the part of her that's above ground be full color, and then the part of her that's below ground is much more translucent. So here's her underwater, here's her underwater part, and it also has a filter on it, right? So you can start to do little things like that that help give you a little bit more realism to it. Here are your spectators, and then the spectators behind the glass are a lighter color, and they're multiplied on top of that. So there's spectator here. It's actually just the opacity is turned way down. There's also I can't remember how much we've talked about in Photoshop. Not a lot, I think. We just talked about how to clean up drawings, right? So in Photoshop, I'll go back through more specifically in a minute, but there's different types of layers that you can set. So you can multiply something, which allows for it to read through another layer. Here are some more fans, all sorts of different things. So there's some shadows on the underside of the ceiling. So you can see that this rendering was just built up out of other things. So we would select different areas and fill it with a color, turn the opacity up or down, and it starts to give you a good sense of what the intention is without having to go in and spend the hours in the 3D model to put all of these materials in. We've got all of our people. And that's pretty much it, right? So we've kind of populated this hand sketch with enough information that we can start talking about what the intent of it was without it seeming too far down the line to make any changes. So, you know, they had big issues with the color yellow in a pool area. I won't tell you why, but yeah, there's associations with children in pools that they didn't want to make. Who thinks of these things? I don't know. What's that? Yeah, those are the locker rooms. Yeah. And so the wall of that is recessed back. And you enter in behind these little fin walls. So there's a little person here that's partially behind the wall so that you can get a sense that you move behind that wall, right? And there's just a really badly copied over multiple times tile pattern on here. It's actually a brick pattern, so it gives it a little bit of a texture. So at this scale, you see that it's got a little bit of a grain to it, but you don't have to, you don't have to go in and model every piece of tile. This is actually just a brick tile pattern, and it's the same thing on the back wall here. And it's the same thing on the deck. You can see over here that there's a very kind of badly perspectively adjusted tile pattern so that you get a sense that there's a deck tile in place. But I think overall it makes sense. There's also one, let's see if I can open this one very quickly.
Can you adjust the perspective in Photoshop?
Yeah, you can. I mean, you can adjust it. You can't change the point of view that the camera was from, but you can adjust the perspective of something. I'll show you how to do that. This is for the same project. It's the same process, so it's a hand sketch with a lot of people thrown on, and this wall is white because we were looking at different options for behind the bleachers. But there's a wood floor that's just a pattern that we copied from the internet multiple times so that we could get a field of wood. The colors of the floor are just selected from the lines, and then there are multiply layers. So that's what I was talking about before. If we were to just make it yellow, it would show up on top of. And let's see, where's the other one? Full color. If we don't multiply this, so if we just have these as 100% opacity fills, you lose all of the things below it and all of the line work. But you can set this to multiply. And what that does is it takes the color and kind of makes everything below it have that hue applied to it. I don't know what the technical version of it is, but it allows for sketches to show through, which is really important.
So is it similar to flattening the layers?
Say that again?
Similar to flattening the layers, just in that part?
No, it's not like flattening the layers. So for example, so if I didn't have this wood floor layer on and I didn't have these colors on, you could see that the background of this is just a white sketch. If I don't want to have to go in and select all of the areas in between the lines of the sketch. I want to just be able to put a field of something over top of it and have the lines still show through. So I can go in and set the wood floor layer. Instead of it being normal, which is what it would look like here, if I set it to multiply, it's going to allow those lines to come through, right? And the same thing with the colors. So, we were pretty accurate in terms of where we selected these things. You can see that we're following the lines pretty closely, but if we don't have this multiplied, the edges of those lines go away, right? So if we were drawing right on top of them. So multiply is something that I use a lot. Use the screen version of this a lot. So you can start to screen something over something else. And it allowed for all of this line work to come through. You can see that we kind of closely followed the lines, but it gets a little blurry in between there. And then lots of people and what? Yeah. Lots of people and just giving a sense of what things are. And again, these bleachers were something that we kind of built up from images that were grabbed online. You can see the people aren't entirely accurate, like this poor woman is missing a couple of limbs. But they give a sense of this place being full of people to watch a game. So what I'd like to do today for the rest of class is to have you guys spend a couple minutes, probably like 10 minutes, just doing a Google search for a style of rendering that you like, right? So you can Google architectural rendering under image searches and scroll around here. You're going to get a lot of kind of corporate ones in the beginning, so that might not be the best way to go about it. You can go onto archinect.net. Oh, sorry, archinect.com. And look at different projects in here, or you can go onto arcdaily.com this is probably a good place to go and see some projects in here. Just scroll down through projects and see one that you might start to like. They're not all going to be renderings starting out, but you can scroll through. And there's also different, there's also different filters somewhere where you can look at, just renderings, or I think renderings is an option. Or presentation or something, projects. So just find a style of rendering that you like. So here's a good example. So here's an NBBJ project that's very kind of ethereal. It's at twilight. It's got fog happening in the background. Find a style of image that you like. You could go on to a particular architecture firm's site that you like. So you might go on to big.dk, which is the Bjarke Ingels site. You could search for an architect and then go to their site through there and look at some projects. Find an image that you like and save it somewhere to your desktop, to your Fountainhead, and then we'll go from there.
Does it need to be a larger image file size?
Not really. You're just going to use it as a reference. You're not going to copy it. And the other thing you're going to need is, I hope everybody by now has a section perspective view taken of your project. Have you done that at one point or another for your studio work? Have you made a section perspective yet? Okay. Let me see if I can just put one on the Canvas site. Of your work?
Yeah.
If you have a rendered section, yes. So on Canvas, I'm going to just drop a really basic section perspective if you need one. Under Files, I'm going to add just in the General Files folder. Where did that save that? So you can go grab this section perspective 1 from the Canvas files folder if you need one. Okay, everybody sort of with me? Everybody have a reference image? Anybody still need inspiration? Guys awake? Yeah, you're good? Okay. And do you either have a drawing to work with, or can you go onto Canvas and grab the one that I put on there? So section perspective 1, you can just download it. Under files, yeah, under the main files folder. What's that?
Where do you want this rendering?
You can just have it, you can open it wherever you want. It's basically for your reference. You're not going to be using it directly, but you're going to use it for reference. So really what the intention of that is, so here's two, right? So here's the Louis Uramaki Lewis one, and here's a Bjarke Ingels night rendering. What we're going to use these for is kind of graphic inspiration for developing our own vignettes, right? We could go through a process and you guys could all make your own, make one that looks exactly the same as the others, but I'm more interested in you finding kind of a graphic style that's of interest to you and starting to figure out how to make drawings that work in that way. So maybe we can just look up here for a couple of minutes and take a look at what we would need to do to use this style to make our own renderings, right, or our own vignettes. So in this particular drawing, the first thing to do is start to deconstruct it, right, and then to know what commands to use in Photoshop to put it together. So what we'll do is go through, and we'll probably use this one as the example, and I'll introduce you to some different tools. You know how to select things, you know how to cut things out, you know how to adjust the color of things, right? You know how to do that with the curves and the levels. But we'll go in and bring in other layers from online and from other locations and bring in people and start thinking about how to make it look as real as possible without necessarily making it look realistic. So what are some of the qualities of this rendering, right? What are some of the things that are happening in this that make it have a particular style? There's shades of gray in the background that give it depth, although it's still abstract. What are some other things?
So it seems pencil-like.
It's got a pencil. It's got a pencil overlay to it. Yep, definitely.
Two references to the bikers, you can tell the one's closer to you.
Right. So there's people in there for scale. Yep. And the bikers are in black and white, right? So the image of the bikers is black and white. The people that are in the house are in color. I'm not sure what kind of commentary that is. Like only your life only gets good if you're in the house, I don't know. But there's some general colors instead of actual materials on the house, so we're seeing that there's, we can tell that this is glass partially because this woman is rendered as slightly lighter below and slightly lighter below over here, so we can tell that there's a translucency to the glass. There's a gray material here and a yellowish material here. I don't know quite what they are, but you get a sense that they're different from each other. There's a lightness to the overall, right? The background probably started out as white and then things were layered over top of it. And there's a shadow on the ground, so we're getting a sense of, we're not just seeing trees behind this house, but we're getting a sense that we're surrounded by trees, right? So how would we go about, like if we were starting out with just our, if this is all we've got to start with, right? We've got an image and we've got a section perspective. So the thing that's going to be slightly different with what we're going to do today is that this is a kind of an elevation perspective view. We're gonna pretend like we're looking at this thing in section perspective. So we're gonna put a ground in. You're gonna tell that we're cutting through the ground and then cutting through the building. But there's still gonna be a oh my goodness. There's still gonna be a kind of a context to it. So imagine that we were slicing through this building and seeing the cut through the ground. So in here, sorry, they're inducing my sister. So in here, a couple of things that we're going to need to do, right? We're going to need to make the ground. We're going to need to put in some context. We need to put in some people, and we're going to need to have some kind of shadows and maybe even some materials on it. Sorry, let me turn this off. So this drawing obviously doesn't have any trees in it, doesn't have any people in it. So you can either start building up a stockpile of images for yourself, or Google Image is an architect's best friend. So trees, right? I can go find the type of trees that I want to have in the background of my building. Do I want kind of not spooky trees with a person in them? I don't know. What are some good trees? Maybe. These are some nice trees. Full resolution only. Oh no, it's file protected. You gotta be careful about stealing people's intellectual property. Don't do it. Here's some good trees. They're at a slightly different perspective, but that'll be good to talk about the perspective tool. So I'm just gonna save this image. And I'm gonna make a folder for this project. So rendering section, and you give it a date or put it under the project name or something in terms of keeping things organized. So I've got a folder now, and I'm gonna call this background trees. The 2 seconds that it takes to change a file name will save you hours of time trying to figure out what DSC0123 versus, file 1 is down the line. I'm going to find some people, and I'll actually give you a bunch of cutout people, but let's see, person, standing. A lot of times now you'll be able to find these versions of people that are already on white backgrounds, or if you find some people that you really like, you can use them and cut them out in Photoshop and just cut out the background. You can choose whether you want it to be outlines of people. So I could grab this guy. So here's a silhouette of a person. So I could save this as in my folder. I don't want to save it as whatever the heck this file name is. I want to save it as person outline. And I can also get a person. These people are way too happy for my building. Let's see. Well, this guy looks like fun. So we'll save him. So in Photoshop, I can start building this into a vignette. So the first thing I need to do is get rid of the background. It's already been turned into a. it's already been turned into a layer, but if yours still has a little padlock beside it and says background, double click on it and turn it into a layer. Just hit OK, and now it'll be a layer. I can go in and use the magic wand tool with this layer selected and select this outside portion. Remember, there's the contiguous versus non-contiguous version option. Mine's over here to the right somewhere. So if you have that selected, it'll only select the white portion up to a line, and then I can delete that. And so the gray and the white in the background is now showing me that this is transparent beyond. I can make a new layer to put the trees in, and I want the stack order in here means what's on top of each other. So the thing at the top of the stack is the thing that's going to be furthest to the front. The thing that's at the back of the stack is going to be furthest back. So my trees are going to be behind my building, so I'm going to make sure my layer is below that. And I'm going to double click and change these into layer names that I understand what they are. So this is my building, UILDING, and this is going to be my trees. And on the trees, I'm going to open in Photoshop that layer, or open that file. So in here, I'm going to open my background trees and select everything, Control A, and you can copy it and paste it onto that layer, or you can drag it in. If this is not in the same file, you can drag it in and it'll make it its own layer, right? Are you following along with me conceptually, if not one-to-one, in terms of doing the steps? Anybody have any questions so far about what's happening? Angela?
No, I think I'm good.
You understand what's happening generally, and you can go back through? Okay.
I do, I can go back through.
Okay. So I need to, obviously my trees don't fill the screen, so I need to scale them up. You can start adjusting the sizes of things by using the transform tools. So under image adjustments, image, I always use a shortcut. Where is it? Edit, transform, here. And you can scale something. You can also hit Command or Control T, and that'll bring you in. And you can right click on it when it's in that mode and choose whether you want to scale it, distort it, warp it, or perspective, adjust the perspective. So right now I just want to scale it up. So it's big enough that I can put it kind of behind my building. I'm going to scale it down just a bit. And then I want to adjust the perspective a little bit. I'm going to turn off this building layer so you can see it. Turn off the building for a minute so that you can see what's happening with the trees. They're kind of skewed off to the side, and it's like somebody's taking this from, laying on the ground. And I want to adjust the perspective a little bit. So if I Command or Control T to turn on transformation or transform, or under Edit, Transform, and choose perspective, now when I adjust it, it's going to allow me to adjust the perspective of the image. And you'll be able to do some adjustments to this, so I can get it to look pretty close to it not having, to as if it had not been kind of warped in some way. And I might need to make the transformation and then scale it a little bit more. I might need to distort it, which allows for me to grab any of the corners and start moving them around. But at this point we're making more of kind of a gestural vignette rather than a photorealistic one, so I just need to get it so that it's relatively close. Things that you might want to be careful about are, right now my sun is coming from exactly the wrong side of the building for where my shadows are coming from. So I'm going to, on that layer, I'm going to image, or edit, transform, and flip horizontal. So the sun's now coming from the other side. It's not quite right. It's still coming from kind of the wrong direction, but at least it's slightly more accurate now. Or at least the shadows coming through the trees are more accurate. Maybe I can hide the sun so I'm not looking at it exactly. And I'm going to put the ground plane in kind of the right place. So I've got some trees in the background now. My encased volumes are in the forest apparently. I need to put in for the section perspective. We're going to imagine this cut plane of the ground extending beyond our building. So I'm going to make a new layer, that I'm going to call ground, or I'm going to call it the cut. And I'm going to use the polygonal lasso tool. I don't really have anything to select, but I'm going to draw in what I want the cut line to be. So I'm going to draw in the ground. So my ground is going to extend back like this, and I'm going to select all of this portion in the front, and I'm going to fill it, edit and fill with black. So I'm just putting in a section here that wasn't there before. I can also put in ground, right? So we've got trees above and we've got the section cut below, but I need some ground to make it look like this thing isn't floating. So I'm going to put in a new layer called grass. I'm going to go back to my trusty Google image search and find some grass. And again, I want to kind of pick the grass that makes sort of sense for this context. So this is kind of, grass from sort of the right perspective. So I'm going to save it here, and I'm going to, again, name it something so I know what it is. And in Photoshop, I'm going to open that. Control A to select everything, cut, Control C, Control V, and so it's placing it on that grass layer. I'm going to take the grass and transform it, so Control or Command T to scale it up so that it fits across my entire drawing. And obviously I don't want it covering my building. So you can either mask it, you can go in and turn the layer off and polygonally lasso out the outline of the building and the cut layer. I would suggest probably doing the making an image mask, which I'm not doing at the moment, so that you can go in with this portion of it selected and cut that out of the grass, right? And then you can go in and start making some sort of horizon by cutting off the top of the grass. And so we're, even though I'm showing everything, only the things that are on the selection or on the layer that are highlighted are being adjusted, right? So if I have this portion selected, like if I wanted to go in and make this my horizon line, I can select this, and with grass highlighted, I can hit delete, and it's just going to delete the portion of the grass that is there. It's not deleting anything of my trees or my building unless I also have those layers selected. I might want to make it look like the grass is getting darker as it goes back so that it starts to look like it's in perspective a little bit more. So a way to do that is by dodging and burning. So these are tools that were used, these terms are from traditional darkroom usage. So when you're in the darkroom, you're letting more light in or keeping more light away from the photograph in a particular location. Dodging is called dodging when you're keeping light away, so you're making something lighter, and burning is adding light to something, so you're making it darker. So if I go to the burn tool and tell it up here in my options that I want it to be kind of exposing, not 100%, but a little bit. I want the midtones to be exposed, and I want the brush to be, kind of big and fuzzy, maybe even bigger than that. I can go in here in the background and start making it a little bit darker along the back, right? So it looks like it's kind of fading into the distance a little bit. And I can do the same thing to my trees layer, so I make it a little bit darker here along the base, so it looks, even though this is not at all photorealistic, it's starting to look a little bit more like these things are in the same general area, right? So I can make this a little bit darker behind the building. We'll put some shadows in a minute so it looks like there's trees, shadows coming from the trees. You could go in with the grass selected and adjust the color, so image adjust, hue and saturation, so that the color of the grass starts to be a little bit more like the color of the trees, so maybe it needs to have a little bit more red in it like this. I could go in and specifically adjust the yellow tones to be more red or green, or I could specifically go in and adjust the green tones to be a little bit more red or green. These are types of things that you can start to go in and fine-tune depending on what you're working with. I'm going to go into the trees layer, so I want to put some shadows on the ground. And I'm going to duplicate this layer, hit OK, and I'm going to turn this to a multiply layer, which will firstly make it look like it's really dark in the background. But what I want to do is take this layer and skew it down so that it looks like there are shadows of the trees casting against the grass. So I'm going to transform it again, so Control T, and I'm going to distort it, basically. I'm going to use the distort option. So I can take it and drag it, and I need to put it above my ground, above my grass. So I need to put it in the right stack order. So Control T, and I can start having it look like it's, I can turn on the perspective and kind of warp the perspective out a bit. Control, distort. Align these so that they're kind of along that kind of fake horizon line that I'm creating. Make the trees kind of line up with the shadows. I want the shadows to be moving in the same direction that the sun's coming from. So I'm going to zoom in and out to get this kind of finely tuned. And I'm going to adjust the opacity way down so that they're just kind of shadowy on the ground. And I'm going to take the shadows off of my building in a minute. And when I'm done, I can hit apply. I'm going to move my building up in the stack order so that it's not in front of the shadows of the trees. And I can go in and start adjusting this up or down a little bit. All right, so now I've got some kind of tree-like shadows on the ground. And you can fine-tune this a little bit more. But remember, it's a multiply. So you could look at what some of the other layers do, what the other layer types do. You can lighten something. You can screen it. You can dodge a color. You can overlay it. There's all sorts of different... The overlay might actually be better in this case. Right. And I might want to go into and make a put a filter on that so it doesn't look like I've actually taken photographs of the trees and put them on the ground, but that I've taken a shadow of the trees. So I could go in and adjust the levels or the exposure, maybe in this case. So the exposure is going to be a little bit less. And I think I am going to set it to multiply. All right, so now I've got kind of a little bit of a background. I've got kind of a sense of the ground being cut. And I want to go ahead and put some people in so that I get a sense of how big this thing is and what it's like in the landscape. So I'm going to open one of my pictures of people. This guy, I don't know why he's in my building, but he is. And because he's on a white backdrop, I can use the magic wand tool and select out all the parts of the white that are in the background. And I'm going to adjust the edge. So edit, let's see, select. I'm going to modify the selection. Let's see, where is the... I'm going to transform this selection. I'm going to refine the edge, sorry, here. You'll have it in your top toolbar. Mine gets cut off when the projector is selected. So I can adjust the radius. I really want to feather the edge a little bit so that I'm getting kind of a smooth transition so it doesn't look like he's been cut out of something and placed in another location, but that he's kind of blending into the background. And I'm going to shift the edge in just a little bit. And then I can hit OK. And so I've got the white portion of it selected now. I'm going to invert that selection, so Command-Shift-I. Control-C, with the arrow selected, Control-C, and go into the section, and Control-V, and he'll come in on a new layer. I'm going to call that person, and I can scale him by Control-T, and make him the size that makes sense for in my building. And he needs to go up above so that I can see him. Right, so depending on how big he is in the building. Right. You could have people sitting on the edge of something. You could have somebody walking up or down the stairs. You could start to put something in the foreground that might be interacting with your building or blocking your building. You could start to fine-tune things like my horizon line got shifted a little bit here, so I'm going to cut this off. Oops, that wasn't quite right. Not sure where my history is. There we go. This thing's annoying. So those are kind of the steps, right? So this is a particular style that you may or may not want to use. You could go in and where's my layers? Start making it a little bit more, I don't know, ghostly, or there might be a particular style that you want it to have. So I can merge these layers into one, so that I can. Oops, no, I don't want to do that. You can go in and start making things slightly less opaque if you wanted to make it a little bit more, give it a particular style that's a little bit lighter in the background. Grass. And then basically it just allows for you to start getting a sense of scale and place for these things, right? Does that kind of make sense? I know that was fast, but I wanted to go through and show you the scope so that you can ask some questions about how you would do one thing versus another, depending on what the style is of something that you want to do.
When you merge the layers, Aaron, what's the purpose of that? Like, why would you want to do that?
So merging the layers puts all the information from a certain number of layers onto one layer. So if you have like 3 different people on 3 different layers, you could merge those layers so that they're all on one layer, so you can control them all at the same time.
Does that create a new layer with all of that merged off, or did you lose all your layers?
Yeah, so for example, if I were to take the building and the cut and merge these layers, it's going to put the cut portion on the building layer so that I can control those at the same time. If I know those are never going to change. The reason that you would keep layers is so that you have the flexibility. You might also, so instead of merging the trees, the grass, and the background, I would probably rather make a layer group that says like context or something. And I could put these in that. And then I could put my building up above, and I could put my person up above that. And I could turn the context on and off all at the same time. Or just have less things showing up in one place. If I had multiple people, I might put those all in a folder, or I could merge them. The reason I would put them all in a folder is if I would want to still be able to move them around and adjust them individually. And it just allows for it to happen a little bit more easily.
I might have missed this,
Mm-hmm.
but did you say anything about bringing photos in and resizing so that you don't get the whole...
Yeah, usually, I mean, you can pretty much from online for the scale of things that you guys are going to be doing at this point, pretty much anything online is going to work unless when you open it up, it's like a thumbnail, like it's a really tiny thing. If you start scaling it up, you can pretty much for this type of thing get the level of information that you need. You can also go in under advanced search and only search for large images. Or only black and white images. So maybe I want, I don't know, biker. And so this is only giving me large black and white images of bikers, and that can filter things out. There's some strange things showing up here, but you know, depending on what you're looking for, that might be the case. You can also filter the searches for drawings. They have that now, so any type of image. So you could look for a photo versus a drawing versus clip art versus animation. You don't want animations probably. So now this is only showing me photographs of bikers, theoretically. I don't know why these sketches are showing up, but you know, you could start to do that if you're concerned about size. You know, I think a lot of it comes, a lot of making a quick vignette that tells a lot without putting a lot of effort into it is just like understanding little things about your building. So the question before about, is that the wall back to the locker rooms? You know, if that's a question, like, you know, what's happening behind this stair wall, and again, this is not a very designed building, but, you know, if I can walk back there, maybe I would want to put this person kind of partially in front of and partially behind, and then cut them in half, right? And so layer, new, via cut, and then the part of him that's on the left, I might want to either turn off or control the opacity if this is a glass wall, right? Then I can get a sense that he's kind of behind something. Or instead of that, sorry, my history isn't showing up very well here. There we go. You know, instead of cutting him in half, maybe I take the portion of the part that would be in front of him, so that would be blocking his view, and hide it. Or there's somebody walking behind a wall or somebody behind glass, you start to see something as slightly transparent. So a lot of making this work has to do with you being observant about like things in the world. You know, we talked about, I forget exactly what we were talking about, but you know, we were talking about like how the quality of light on the wall changes from inside to outside, or how it turns a corner, or how, you know, something tends to get darker towards an edge. Those sorts of things start to be things that you can layer onto a drawing that will help somebody understand it more as something in the world, right? So with a few simple things, you could do things like, you know, even though the rendering didn't show it, you could put a tone on here, right, and make this a slightly different gray. So I could select this, make a new layer, and call this like shadow or something, and fill it. Yeah, you could and I'll show you how to put a material on it. So you could put a shadow on it, you could adjust the opacity if you wanted it to just be a gray, and you could set it to multiply if you want to make sure that the lines behind it start to read through. If it's not on multiply, if it's just on normal, depending on how carefully you've selected it, you may or may not see the lines through. So if you multiply it, it'll be better. If I wanted to show this as a wood material, obviously I don't have any wood in my drawing. I go back to my trusty Google search and search for wood. I don't know, wood flooring. And because my advanced settings are on to black and white, let me turn those off really quickly. Full color, any color. The key with grabbing textures and making them something that works in a drawing or a rendering is that you want something that is a neutral field, right? So you don't want something that gets lighter in a portion or has a kind of a hot spot that's from a flash. You want something as neutral as possible so that you can copy it over and over again. So for example, if this was a wood texture that I was happy with, or you know, one of these were, let's say this one. This is just kind of a general, so I'm going to save this as in my rendering folder as wood floor. I can go into Photoshop and open that. And this is not the scale that's going to cover my entire floor. Like if I were to take this, Control A, Control C, and go into my rendering, place it in here, and scale it down, so Control T to transform. This one might actually work, but if I want it to cover that plane that I just turned gray, I'm going to need to distort it probably. So I'm going to put the corner of it here, a corner of it here, this corner back here, and this corner here. So it starts to make that, you know, in the semi-right perspective. If that doesn't have the scale of material that you would need, like if this is like wood planks that would be 2 feet wide, you would go into your wood floor here, and you can basically manually tile an image, right? So if I've got a piece of material that's this big, and I want it at that scale to cover something that's this big, I can go in, so this is the image size, and this is the canvas size. So I can increase the overall page of the image, and then I can go in and copy this and paste it over and over again so that I get a grid of this core material, which is why it's important not to have something that has like a hot spot in it, because then you're going to end up with a repeated hot spot, right? You guys have seen that. And that's the problem with materials that you get in some basic rendering programs. They look like they're repeated planes of grass, right? So I could go in and adjust the canvas size. So it's telling me that right now it's like 8 inches by 10 inches. Remember these little kind of 9 square things from Illustrator? It works in Photoshop too. So if I set this to have the top left corner be the anchor, and I want it to be, let's say I want it to be twice as wide and twice as tall, I can multiply this by 2, or I can just manually say that I want it to be 16 inches wide, and I want it to be 20 inches tall, right? So that's going to give me white stuff in the background here. I can take this wood and copy it and paste it, and bring it over here to the side, and paste it again, bring it over here to the bottom, paste it again. Sometimes if you have something that matches fairly well, but you don't want it to look like it's completely repeated, you can shift something, right? So you can shift this off the repeat. And I'm just right-clicking to select the layer. Otherwise, you can go up here under the layers and pick which layer you want to move, right? So if layer 2 is selected, I'm moving this portion of it. If layer 3 is selected, I'm moving this portion. But if I right-click, I can tell it that I want it to be layer 2 or layer 3 or background. You can also mirror something. So maybe these two line up pretty well, so I'm happy with how they look. But I want these guys to be mirrored, so I can Control T, transform, right-click, and flip horizontal, and do the same thing on the top. Control T, right-click, flip horizontal. And that'll just help break up the visual rhythm of it if it's repeating over and over again. So I want to go in and make sure there aren't any specifically white lines that are going across there. I want to get rid of this extra white that's left over, so I'm going to select the part that I want to keep, and under Image Crop, I want to crop out that extra white portion. And then I can flatten this. So if I can see under layers, you can select a layer, and on the top right you can flatten the image, right? So up here in the little toolbar, and that'll put everything on the same layer. So I'm not dealing with 4 separate wood layers anymore, but I've got one whole thing. Then I can copy this in and place it in my drawing, in my file that I've been working with, and scale it down, and then look at changing the perspective and the view of it. So Control T and distort. Maybe I want this side wall to be wood, so I'm going to line it up with the 4 corners. And you would go in and do kind of fine-tune this, obviously. Right. And then I can go in and turn it to a slightly more transparent, so I can see through it. And I can go in and select out this portion where there's no wall and delete it from that layer, and then adjust the transparency again. So now I've got a wood grain of a different scale on the wall than I do on the floor. Does that kind of make sense? Lots of silence here.
When
Yep.
you flatten images,
Uh-huh.
flatten layers,
Uh-huh.
let's say, like, if you look at the layers that you have up right now,
Mm-hmm.
if you, let's say you wanted to just flatten the shadows layer one in there too, would you just select and it flattens everything above it, or does it flatten all of them?
Flattening is everything. If you want to combine layers, you merge them. But I would suggest keeping things as separate as possible until there's a reason to merge them together. And you almost never flatten an entire image unless it's something like the wood where you're making something from it that you're going to use somewhere else. You wouldn't, at the end of the day, like when I'm done with this rendering, you wouldn't flatten it. You would keep it in its layers so that you can then go back and adjust it if you wanted to.
That changes the designation of PSD.
Yeah, in its current state, when I save it, it's not going to save it as a JPEG with all of its layer information. You're going to save it as a Photoshop file. Does that kind of make sense? So some of those commands, is anybody completely, totally lost?
It's hard to remember the commands.
Yeah.
If you've never used it before, I mean, if I forget to even turn something, it's funny.
Right. So let's,
What is, because you mentioned, what's due next Wednesday?
So next Wednesday, I made a assignment. Oh, I didn't upload it, but I will add it now. Let's see. Assignment 3. What's that? Making smart-ass comments back there? Okay. Not this time, usually. So what's due next Wednesday is kind of what we talked about, right? So you're going to take the project that you're currently working on and you're going to represent it in, not using the template that you were given. So think about hierarchy, think about the ordering system of the board. And one of the things that it asks for, so let's look at this. So using your encased, I believe so, yeah. And this is also on Canvas. Using your encased volumes project, develop a presentation board, 18 by 24 or something, right? Bigger than 18 by 24 page that includes a section perspective with vignetted context, so the process that we just went through, using the section perspective. Well, yours are in flat perspective, so you'll want to do one that's at a slightly skewed perspective, I would think. Put in the context and develop, we didn't really talk about partie diagrams today like I intended, so I'll take that portion out. So take this out unless you want to develop a partie diagram. And then the supporting plan sections and elevations that describe the intent of your project. So, if you don't need all 4 elevations to describe what you're intending to do, you don't need to show all 4 elevations. If you don't need to show all the photographs of your models. You can choose what you think is important to show what you're intending with your project. You need to show the project name, your name. The project name may not necessarily be encased volumes. Maybe there's some quality that you've been exploring that you want to name it something else. And your name on the page. You also need a concept statement on the board. So we talked about this a little bit last time, like what was your intent with what you were designing? So you get a brief that asks you to do certain things, but you really have to process that and decide what it is that you are bringing or what you're exploring or what you're trying to do. So everybody's looking at encased volumes, everybody's looking at these 3 rooms and how they're related and somehow related to the sun. But what is your particular approach to that? How can you describe what that is? So it's the same type of thing that you would need to do for Friday anyway in terms of presenting your projects. So think about the layout, think about the proportion, the ordering system, the grid, the color, the context, and those sorts of things when developing your layout. So this is just an example. Obviously, this is a more complex project than you're dealing with, but it's a fairly simple geometry. has a kind of a vignetted render. This is more of a photorealistic rendering, but you can imagine your building in a context, although it's going to be in section perspective. Here it shows elevations and sections, a couple other renderings, exterior and interior, a series of diagrams. So you obviously don't have all of this content. But at the place where you are right now, with the project that you are currently developing, how could you think about presenting it in a slightly different way or in a very different way than what you're being asked to do for Friday? And think about the kinds of things that you would want to show. Is your board, these boards have a very particular order to them, right? There's a slightly thicker column here and a slightly thinner column here. These are actually two separate boards, but they align across, right? So there's kind of an image zone at the top, a drawing zone at the bottom, and then an explanation diagram zone in the middle. How do you organize the board, right? Is your image the entire board? Like you make a sky that's the entire height of the board, and then you put your drawings on top of the sky? How do you do it? And you might start looking at examples online. So there's a website called issuu.com, ISSUU. And you can search for architecture portfolios. CHITC3. And so you can go down here and look at, there's no guarantee that all of these are good, but you can go in and see, how this person is presenting their project, right? Once it pops up. So these are all just portfolios that people have put online, so you can see what this person's style is, see if it's to your liking once we get into some actual projects, right? So here's a project that they did on biomimicry. And a book is going to be different than a board, but you start to get a sense of how things can be laid out. You can go onto different competition websites. So there was a competition a couple years ago for Asuka City, New York. I think I spelled that wrong. And you can look at presentation boards for competition. So this is, again, you have to be the one that decides whether one is good or bad, but here's an example of one that has, the entire background is an image and then the drawings are overlaid on top of it. Here's one that's more the kind of post-it model where you've got little piece, little piece, little piece, and it all comes together in an aggregate way. There are going to be ones that have kind of dominant images and then supporting text, right? And I think the best way to do this is to look at examples. And so there's 37 pages in this one of different design ideas. So this is probably a really bad example, right? This weird background that doesn't really relate to things. They've got scanned sketches over here that are sideways, and the background hasn't been cleaned up. These are, these you can see in here that, well, it's a little hard to see on the projection, but in here this is done in probably SketchUp or something where you start to see the pattern of the grass repeat, so it looks like somebody laid down squares of sod. What's that?
Looks like a quilt.
Minecraft, it does, yeah. Looks like. And not to say that you can't do good renderings in SketchUp, but there's certain things that you start to see, right? So here's kind of a nicely composed board that has a combination of renderings and details, and here's how you put it together, and here's people in it. So this is a nice board, I would say. It's got a consistent color. It's got a consistent style to it. So the sky is always the same. Everything is kind of the same tone of gray. You don't have like dark here and light here, other than where they're showing a night and a day. So I think, in the same way that you pulled an image to kind of be your graphic inspiration, looking at existing boards is a good way to think about how you might want to structure a project. You also have all of the presentation boards that are in the Bailey and up on the third floor. You can go look around and see. Again, there's going to be better ones and worse ones, but hopefully looking at a bunch of them will help you start to see, what you think is good and what you think is bad. So here's a very particular style, this kind of foggy, ghosty, desaturated style. I think that these are beautiful images. Whether they relate to the content of your project, I think is the question. You know, I wouldn't do a rendering like this for like a daycare that you want it to be more happy and upbeat and, you know, brighter colors. It's daycare for ghost children. You know, so you can start to hopefully get a sense of style and quality and organization and what's working and what's not working. I don't know if any of you guys went and saw the, you know, a couple weeks ago, saw the 6970 presentation boards that were down at the Gateway, but there were 200 different versions of presentation boards down there as well. So, does that make sense? So everybody understand what you need to do for next week? What do you need to do? Dallin, what do you need to do?
Vision board, figure out how we're gonna show it.
Okay. Everybody understand generally how to do the vignettes in Photoshop? We can take some time and answer specific questions for the rest of the class.
This is due Wednesday, right?
It's due Wednesday, yep. So what are some types of things in Photoshop that you would want to be able to do? So we talked a little bit about adding material, we talked a little bit about adding background images, people, and I'll put a folder on Canvas with just tons and tons of people that are already cut out so you can go in and pick the ones that you want. So people standing, people sitting, people whatever. What are some other things that you would want to do?
The biggest thing the holdup that I had was when I tried to open up the trees,
Mm-hmm.
and it opened up a second Photoshop file,
Mm-hmm.
and so I kind of lost you. And
You got stuck on that?
yeah.
So say we wanted to bring this grass in. We've opened up a separate Photoshop file, right? The first thing you need to do is tell it what you want to bring in, right? So I could bring in part of the grass or all of the grass. So up here in the selection option, you've got your different marquee tools, you've got your polygonal lasso tools, right? So I could bring in a piece of grass that looks like this. And you need to be in the select mode here, right? You need to be using the move tool rather than just the selection tool to bring in something. If you have just the selection selected, and I hit Control C and then go in here and hit Control V, it's going to bring in that selection. It may not look like it. I may need to make a smaller selection. Like if I bring in this, right? Control C, Control V. It's going to bring in a small selection. If I want to actually bring in the grass, I need to have the move tool selected. So Control C, Control V. Where is that coming in? Why is that not showing up? So here's that grass that just came in. It's down below something in terms of the layers. So that brought that in here. Is that what you were having problems with?
Yeah, no, because I made the layer and I was fine, and then I tried to open the grass, but it opened a whole other separate, like where you have the grass, like that.
Yeah.
And so that's where I.
So you need to bring this into the grass.
Yeah.
So you need to select it.
Okay now.
Okay, so you're okay now. Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
That's just what threw me because
Okay.
I didn't.
You couldn't get that caught up. Okay,
Right.
okay.
Could you go over how to cut again, how you do in the very beginning?
How to cut what?
When you cut out the black triangle at the bottom.
How you added that in?
On your layer, when you added when you cut out underneath the building, when you made the whole front bottom corner of the frame.
We made this black. So that's a fill command. So in layers, I've combined these together. So let me just quickly get rid of them and then pretend like it wasn't there. So basically you need to tell it where you want to do something, right? So using the select command will tell it an area. I'm going to make a new layer to add that ground plane to. And so I'm going to select, I can start here along the base of the building, or let's say that we want to pretend like this other base isn't here. So I want to start here and go across. So I'm just using the polygonal lasso tool, and I'm going to select an area that I want to have become the kind of ground. Beyond the bounds of your building, you can go up or down. You know, if you want to say that this is on a slope, then I might want to start out, you know, kind of sloping up and then follow the baseline of my building and then slope up again. And then to make it black, you just fill it. So edit and fill. It's going to fill it with black. You can tell it to fill it with any color, so it gives you a series of options. So I can either choose black, white, 50% gray, or if I want it to be another color, so if I want it to be red, I can set my foreground color over here to red, and then fill and choose foreground color, and that'll fill it with red. So foreground and background here are like the fill and stroke in Illustrator, and you can flip them backward and forward. You can double click to set a color, and I can fill it again and make it black, because that's what I want my cut to be. Right? You could make your section cut white or red, but whatever it's going to be, it should be the cut here as well as the ground. And so if this is the case, then I need to adjust my grass. So maybe I'll make make a new grass layer. Sorry, so this grass isn't going to work for me anymore. I'm going to turn off my shadows. This is one of the reasons that I should have been naming my layers as I went. So I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to bring in a different grass. So I'm going to start over with the grass. So Control C, Control V. And that will give it its own layer. Or you could have made the layer for grass and then added that to it. So I'm now going to call this grass 2. And I'm going to scale it. So with my move tool selected, I can hit Control or Command T, and that will start all of the transformation. And I can right click on here and choose which type of transform I want to use. So right click and scale, and that'll let me, if I hold down Shift, it'll let me scale it up or down proportionally.
If you do not hold the shift key, will it distort it?
Yeah, if you don't hold the Shift, it'll squish it. And when that's done, obviously this is more grass area than I need, so I need to be able to see through it to be able to know what I want to turn on and off. So I'm going to make the opacity of my layer a little bit less. So I'm going to change the opacity down just so I can see through it for now. And there's a lot of different ways you can do this. You could, like I said before, you could mask things, but basically I want to delete out the part of the grass that is overlapping with my building. So I'm going to go in here and select out the part of my building that I can see through. And on the grass layer, I'm going to delete that out. And then it becomes a question of putting this in the right stack order. There's something else showing up down here. Oh, it's showing up on top of the black. So I'm going to put this up here, right? And I have the opacity turned down. So then I can go in and start fine-tuning where I want the ground line to be. So if I select everything above where the ground is going to be, I can delete that off of the grass layer. I have to be selected on the grass, delete that, and then turn the opacity back up so that I can see it, right? So now it's kind of closer. I'm going to go in and just turn my trees up. It's getting a little hard to see what's happening behind them. I can go in, so my grass is like really bright now and my trees are a lot darker, so I can go in and adjust the hue and saturation of it. Right, so I can make it a little bit darker. I can maybe adjust the color of it so it's a little bit more yellow, like the yellow that's in my trees. I can go back in and do some of that burning along the back edge to make it seem like it's kind of receding into the distance a bit more. And it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to give you a sense of space, right? I could go in with the burn tool and put in some shadows for the trees. You know, if this is falling across the ground here, maybe I want a slightly smaller size so I can do these guys. I can kind of show that there's a shadow coming down. I could do the same thing on top of my building. So I could activate the layer of the building. Let me turn off this wood. So I could say that there's a shadow coming across. If I select the highlights, a shadow coming across here. burning isn't really the best way to draw shadows. It's a good way to kind of make things have shadowy edges, but you know, depending on what it is that you're trying to do, you might be able to use it a little bit to your advantage. You could also kind of pick a portion of this background image of the trees and copy it. So Control C, and then with the Move tool selected, Control C, Control V, and it'll duplicate that portion of the layer. I can move this up in front of my building, and then scale it and distort it a little bit. I basically want to make it look like a shadow of trees is casting across the side of my building. So there's some kind of shadows over here. And then I'm going to multiply it and desaturate it so it looks like a shadow and not a picture that got pasted on, and then adjust the opacity, right? Now it looks like I've got shadows on the side of my building, and I can go in and fine-tune. You know, obviously I would have lined these things up more carefully, right? So now I've got kind of shadows. And you could do the same thing for this ground plane. Right. So does that kind of make some sense? When you guys start getting more specifically into what your particular approach is going to be, feel free to contact me, email me with questions, or you know, maybe a couple of you can get together and we can set up a time to come in and look at specific things that you might have questions about. All right, so I can put in another layer here.
Do you come in most days, Erin, or are there days that are better than others?
It depends. Depends on. There's no regular day, so just email. If you want to catch me, email me, and then we can be sure to set up a time. If you try to grab me, I might be running from one place to another and wouldn't have the time to spend that I would like to help you out. And they might start to look a little cartoony in the beginning, but the sooner we start with this kind of thing, the more conversation we can have about like little things that you can fine tune to make it seem more realistic, right? Questions, comments, concerns?
What makes a good rendering? Like if somebody just on the street asked you that, what would you say?
What makes a good rendering?
Architectural rendering.
There's a lot of, let's see, what makes a good rendering?
Well, because I hear older students say, oh, that's a horrible rendering, or oh, that's a really good rendering.
Well, let's go up to the Bailey and just look around, so we can, not to like point out what's a bad rendering, but we can talk about qualities of things. It's hard to talk about an abstract